At 10:43 that night, Daniel Reed called his mother for the 14th time. The phone rang until the same recorded voice answered. He hung up, called again. Nothing. Outside their apartment window, cars moved through the wet street below. Somewhere in the building, a television audience laughed at something Daniel couldn't hear. His mother's dinner sat untouched on the stove. Chicken stew, rice. The plate she had covered for herself was beginning to dry around the edges. Daniel looked at the clock again. 10:44. His mother finished work at 9. She was never this late without calling. Never. He stood from the kitchen table and walked down the narrow hallway toward her bedroom. "Mum?" He knew she wasn't there. Still, he said it. Her room was dark. Daniel reached for the light switch. The bed was neatly made. Her old handbag was gone. Her slippers remained underneath the chair. Then his eyes moved toward the wardrobe, and his stomach tightened. The empty hanger was still there. He knew exactly what should have been hanging from it. A navy blue cleaning uniform with white piping along the collar. The uniform his mother wore 5 evenings every week. The uniform Daniel had taken that morning. The uniform he had shoved underneath his own bed because he could no longer stand the thought of his classmates seeing her in it. Daniel slowly turned toward his bedroom. For the first time all day, the thing he'd done no longer felt clever. It felt ugly. He dropped to his knees beside his bed and reached underneath. His fingers touched fabric. Daniel pulled it out. The blue uniform was still crumpled exactly where he had hidden it. For several seconds he simply stared at it. Then his phone rang. Daniel jumped so hard he nearly dropped it. Unknown number. He answered immediately. "Mum?" There was silence. Then a woman's voice. "Is this Daniel Reed?" His throat tightened. "Yes. My name is Mrs. Alvarez. I work with your mother." Daniel stood slowly. "Where is she?" The woman didn't answer immediately, and that silence frightened him more than anything she could have said. "Daniel, where's my mum? I was hoping you could tell me." Daniel stopped breathing. Mrs. Alvarez continued. "Your mother never came to work tonight. If stories about ordinary people and the moments that change their lives mean something to you, subscribe to Written Destiny and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because sometimes the person we understand the least is the one who has quietly given us the most." That morning had begun with toast. Burned toast. Daniel's mother stood at the tiny kitchen counter, scraping the blackened edge with a butter knife, while Daniel searched for his school tie. "You've seen it?" "No. You moved it." "I did not move your tie." "You clean everything. That does not mean I collect neckties." Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway. At 15, he had become tall enough to look down slightly when speaking to his mother. Something Mrs. Reed regularly reminded him did not make him an adult. She held up the burned slice. "This one yours?" Daniel frowned. "Obviously not." "Wonderful." She placed the good slice on his plate and kept the burned one. Daniel noticed. He always noticed. He just rarely said anything. His mother, Grace Reed, was 42. Small, quick on her feet. The kind of woman who could make one chicken last 3 meals and still insist she wasn't hungry when the final piece disappeared. She worked afternoons cleaning offices at Brookfield Academy, the same private secondary school Daniel attended on scholarship. And lately, Daniel hated that fact more than he wanted to admit. His mother sat opposite him. "You have the science presentation today." Daniel nodded while eating. "Nervous?" "No. You've been practicing in the bathroom mirror for 4 nights. That doesn't mean I'm nervous. It means the mirror is now an expert on renewable energy." Daniel almost smiled. Almost. Then she reached across the table and straightened his tie. "Mum." "What?" "I can do it. You were walking around with it crooked." Daniel pulled away. "I said I can do it." Her hand stopped. Only for a second. Then she lowered it. "All right." Daniel immediately regretted the sharpness in his voice. But he didn't apologize. That had become one of the strange things about being 15. He could feel sorry and still refuse to say it. Grace stood and picked up her handbag. "I'm leaving early today. Mrs. Alvarez asked me to cover the East Corridor before my normal shift." Daniel looked at her. "The East Corridor?" Yes. His stomach sank. The East Corridor was beside the science laboratories. His science presentation was third period. His classmates would be there. Grace didn't notice his expression. She opened the wardrobe near the kitchen where she kept her work clothes. "Where's my uniform?" Daniel's eyes moved toward his bedroom, just for a fraction of a second. But Grace saw it. What? Nothing. She searched behind a coat. Then another. That's strange. Daniel stared at his cereal bowl. The uniform was underneath his bed. He had hidden it 20 minutes earlier. Not because he wanted her to lose her job. Not because he hated her. At least that was what he would later tell himself. He had hidden it because of what happened 2 days before. He had been standing outside the science block with 3 boys from his class. Nathan Cole had been talking about his father's new car. Oliver was showing them photographs from a ski trip. Then Grace had appeared at the far end of the corridor pushing her cleaning cart. Daniel had seen her first. He had quietly turned his back, but Nathan hadn't. "Isn't that your mum?" Daniel's face grew hot. Grace waved. Nathan looked from her uniform to Daniel's blazer. "Your mum works here." Daniel could still remember the pause before answering. "She just helps sometimes." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Grace had walked over smiling. "You forgot your lunch." Daniel had taken the bag quickly. "Thanks." She had looked at the boys. "Hello." Nathan smiled politely. Oliver did too. Nobody actually mocked her. Nobody laughed. That almost made Daniel's shame worse, because the humiliation existed mostly inside him. He imagined what they would say later. He imagined other students knowing. He imagined being the scholarship boy whose mother emptied their bins. So that morning, when Grace went downstairs to collect the mail, Daniel took the uniform. He folded it badly, shoved it underneath his bed, and told himself she would simply wear something else. Now Grace stood in front of the wardrobe, puzzled. "I could have sworn I washed it yesterday." Daniel swallowed. "Maybe it's at work." "No, I wore it home." She checked the laundry basket. "Nothing." Grace sighed. "I'll call Mrs. Alvarez and borrow one." Daniel felt relief, then shame. The relief won. Grace put on an old grey cardigan. As she passed him, Daniel noticed her pause beside the kitchen counter. There was an envelope beneath a pile of grocery flyers. She slid it quickly into her handbag. Daniel caught only 2 words printed across the top. "Final notice." What was that? Grace looked up. "What?" "That letter. Nothing you need to worry about." "Is it the rent?" "No." She smiled too quickly. Daniel knew that smile. It meant yes. He put down his spoon. "Mum, science presentation." She pointed toward him. "You worry about renewable energy. I'll worry about boring envelopes." Then she kissed the top of his head. Daniel pulled away automatically. "Mum!" Grace raised both hands. "All right. Apparently mothers are embarrassing before 8 in the morning now." She said it lightly. Daniel didn't answer. Grace looked at him for a second longer than usual. Then she picked up her handbag. "Have a good day, Danny." "Daniel." Her smile faded slightly. "Daniel." And she left. That was the last conversation they had that morning. By lunchtime, Daniel had almost forgotten about the uniform. His presentation went well. Mr. Bennett gave him the highest mark in the class. Nathan slapped him on the shoulder. "Scholarship boy saves the planet again." Daniel smiled. He knew Nathan didn't mean anything cruel by it. Still, those 2 words bothered him. Scholarship boy. As they walked toward lunch, Oliver said, "Your mum working today?" Daniel glanced at him. "Why?" "My phone fell behind a radiator Tuesday. She helped me get it out." Daniel said nothing. Oliver continued, "She's nice." The words should have made Daniel proud. Instead, he changed the subject. At 3:30, Daniel walked out through the front gates. Usually, he took the number 12 bus home. That day, he hesitated. Across the courtyard, he could see Mrs. Alvarez pushing a cleaning cart toward the administration building. Grace wasn't with her. Good, Daniel thought, then immediately hated himself for thinking it. He went home. At 5:20, Grace texted him, "Food in fridge, heat it properly." Not the way you do where the middle is still frozen. Daniel smiled despite himself. He replied. A minute later, another message arrived. And study. Daniel typed. I know. 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, love you. Daniel looked at the message. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He almost typed it back. Then Nathan sent a message to their class group about a football game. Daniel switched screens. He never answered his mother. At 7:15, Daniel heated dinner. At 8, he started homework. At 9:15, he checked the time. His mother should have been leaving Brookfield. At 9:40, he sent, You coming? No answer. At 10, he called. Nothing. By 10:30, annoyance had turned into worry. By 10:43, worry had become fear. And at 10:45, Mrs. Alvarez told him Grace had never arrived at work. Daniel gripped the phone. What do you mean she never arrived? She called around noon about borrowing a uniform, Mrs. Alvarez said. I told her there was an extra one in the staff room. Daniel closed his eyes. She sounded normal? A little tired. Did she say where she was? No. Daniel looked down at the crumpled blue uniform in his hand. Mrs. Alvarez continued. When she didn't show, I assumed she was sick. But Grace never misses without calling. Daniel knew that. Everybody knew that. What time did you last speak to her? 12:07. Daniel checked his messages. His mother had texted him at 5:20, so she had been somewhere after speaking with Mrs. Alvarez. Somewhere other than work. Daniel, is there another adult there with you? No. Your aunt? She lives 3 hours away. Mrs. Alvarez hesitated. I'm coming over. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Daniel ended the call. Then he noticed something. His mother's text. Food in fridge. Grace normally sent that message around 4, before beginning her shift. But she had sent it at 5:20. Daniel opened the message details. 5:21 p.m. Then he noticed another thing. His mother had never said, I'm at work. Daniel went to her bedroom. He opened drawers. Not because he knew what he was looking for. He just needed to do something. Socks, old receipts, a sewing kit, photographs. Then he pulled open the bottom drawer. It stuck halfway. Daniel pulled harder. Something behind it shifted. He reached inside. His fingers touched paper. Daniel pulled out a small notebook. The cover was bent. His mother's handwriting filled the pages. Not a diary. Numbers, dates, expenses, rent, electricity, bus, Daniel lunch, school books. He flipped pages faster. Then he reached the most recent week. Beside Wednesday, Brookfield, 4 hours. Underneath, Harris Building, 5 hours. Thursday, Brookfield, 4 hours. Harris, 5 hours. Friday, Brookfield, 4 hours. Harris, 5 hours. Daniel stared. His mother had another job. She had never told him. He checked earlier pages. The same name appeared again and again. Harris Building, sometimes until midnight, sometimes later. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. That explained why she occasionally came home after he was already asleep. She always said the school had needed extra cleaning. Daniel had believed her. His phone buzzed. He grabbed it. Mrs. Alvarez. I'm downstairs. Daniel ran. 20 minutes later, they were driving across town. Mrs. Alvarez was a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s who smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and peppermint. Daniel sat rigidly beside her. You know the Harris Building? He asked. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel. She didn't answer. Daniel turned. You know it. Mrs. Alvarez sighed. Your mother asked me not to tell you. Tell me what? She cleans there after Brookfield. Daniel stared through the windshield. Why? Mrs. Alvarez gave him a strange look. Why do you think? Daniel looked away. Money. Of course. But something in her expression told him that wasn't the whole answer. They reached the Harris Building at 11:26. It was a 12-story office block near the railway station. Most of its windows were dark. A security guard sat behind the front desk. Daniel rushed toward him. Grace Reed. She works here. The guard looked up. Grace? Yes. Her son. Daniel nodded. The guard's expression changed. He stood. She didn't come in tonight. Daniel felt the floor disappear beneath him. Mrs. Alvarez stepped forward. When did you last see her? Yesterday. You're sure? Yes. Daniel pulled out his phone. She texted me at 5:20. The guard shook his head. Wasn't here. Daniel looked between them. First Brookfield, now Harris. His mother had missed both jobs. Yet sometime after 5, she had sent him a message as though everything were normal. The guard suddenly frowned. Wait. He walked back behind the desk. What? Grace came by yesterday asking about this. He opened a drawer, pulled out a small white envelope. Daniel recognized his mother's handwriting immediately. Across the front was one name, Daniel. His heart began pounding. The guard held it out. She told me if anything happened and she couldn't collect it herself. He stopped. Daniel stared at him. If what happened? The guard shook his head. She didn't say. Daniel slowly took the envelope. His hands had begun to tremble. Mrs. Alvarez whispered, Daniel, but he had already opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet. He unfolded it. The first line made him stop breathing. Danny, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong, and there are things I should have told you a long time ago. Daniel read the first line again, then the second. Danny, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong, and there are things I should have told you a long time ago. His fingers tightened around the page. Mrs. Alvarez moved closer. What does it say? Daniel didn't answer. He kept reading. First, don't be frightened by this letter. I am not planning to disappear from you. There is nowhere in this world I would rather be than home, arguing with you about your tie. Daniel swallowed. But lately, I have been trying to fix something before you discovered how bad things had become. I thought protecting you meant keeping you from worrying. Maybe I was wrong. Below that, his mother's handwriting became slightly uneven. If I don't come home, go to Mrs. Alvarez first. Then go to 17 Carlton Street. Ask for Mr. Harris. Give him the small brass key in the kitchen drawer. Daniel stopped. What key? Mrs. Alvarez looked confused. I don't know. He continued. Do not give the key to anyone else, especially not before you speak to Mr. Harris yourself. Then one final line. And Danny, whatever you discover, please remember that I never wanted you to feel ashamed of the life I could give you. I only wanted you to have choices I never had. Daniel's vision blurred. He lowered the letter. For several seconds, the lobby was silent. The security guard looked away politely. Daniel folded the paper carefully. Take me home. Mrs. Alvarez nodded. Neither of them spoke during the drive. But Daniel's mind would not stop. I never wanted you to feel ashamed. He remembered turning away from her in the corridor. He remembered telling Nathan she just helped sometimes. He remembered hiding the uniform. He remembered not replying when she wrote, "Love you." He pressed his forehead against the cold window. For the first time, Daniel understood something that hurt. His mother had noticed. Maybe not the uniform. Maybe not what he'd done that morning. But she'd noticed the embarrassment. She had known, and she had pretended not to. The brass key was exactly where Grace said it would be. Kitchen drawer. Underneath a packet of batteries and 3 takeaway menus they never used. It was smaller than Daniel expected. Old. Heavy for its size. A strip of faded masking tape had been wrapped around the top. Written on it in black ink, 17C. Mrs. Alvarez stared at it. You've never seen that before. Daniel shook his head. Carlton Street is 20 minutes from here. Then we're going. Mrs. Alvarez glanced at the clock. 12:14 a.m. Daniel, maybe we should call the police first. They'll say she's only been missing a few hours. She left a letter in case she disappeared. Daniel looked at her. That was enough. Mrs. Alvarez pulled out her phone. The police took the report. They asked questions Daniel hated. Was Grace depressed? Number. Had she ever left without telling him? Number. Did she have a boyfriend? Daniel didn't know. Any family disputes? No. Debts. He thought of the final notice. Shao. Maybe. They asked for a recent photograph. Daniel opened his phone. He had hundreds of pictures. School. Friends. Football. Memes. Random food. He scrolled and scrolled, then realized there were almost no recent photographs of his mother. The last one was 8 months old, Grace asleep on the sofa with a laundry basket beside her. He had taken it because her mouth was slightly open and he'd thought it looked funny. Now he stared at the picture and felt sick. "That one," the officer said. Daniel handed over the phone. At 1:08 a.m., Daniel and Mrs. Alvarez reached Carlton Street. Number 17 was not what Daniel expected. Not an office. Not another cleaning company. It was an old 3-story brick building, squeezed between a pharmacy and a closed tailor shop. A brass plaque beside the door read, "Harris Community Trust." Below it, food, housing, school support, family assistance. Daniel looked at Mrs. Alvarez. "You knew?" "No." They rang the bell. Nothing. Again. Finally, a light appeared upstairs. A curtain moved. A minute later, the door opened. An elderly man stood there in slippers and a robe. Grey hair. Thin face. Glasses pushed crookedly onto his nose. "Yes? Mr. Harris?" The man's expression sharpened. "Yes." Daniel held up the letter. "My mother is Grace Reed." The old man went completely still. Then he looked past Daniel toward the street. "Where is she?" Daniel's stomach turned. "You don't know?" Mr. Harris opened the door wider. "Come inside." The office smelled like old books and instant coffee. Children's drawings covered one wall. Thank you cards covered another. Boxes of canned food sat beside a filing cabinet. Mr. Harris disappeared into the back and returned fully dressed several minutes later. He looked at the key in Daniel's hand. "Grace gave you that?" "She told me to bring it if something happened." Mr. Harris sat slowly. Mrs. Alvarez remained standing. "What does it open?" The old man looked at Daniel. "Your mother wanted to tell you herself. She's missing." "I understand." "Then tell me." Mr. Harris sighed. "The key opens a storage box in the basement." Daniel's frustration flared. "What's in it?" "Things your mother has kept for almost 14 years. Daniel stared. "Why?" Mr. Harris didn't answer directly. Instead he asked, "How much do you know about your father?" The question landed like something dropped from a height. Daniel's face hardened. "He left." Mr. Harris watched him carefully. "That's what Grace told you?" "She didn't need to tell me." "What do you know?" Daniel stood. "That he walked out when I was a baby." Mr. Harris remained calm. "Did she ever say that?" Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came. He searched his memory. Whenever Daniel asked about his father, Grace usually said, "He couldn't stay." Or, "Some people aren't meant to be parents." Once, when Daniel was 9, she had said, "Your father made a choice, and I made mine. Mine was you." Daniel had turned those sentences into a story. His father abandoned them. Grace never corrected him. Mr. Harris stood. "Come downstairs." The basement contained old furniture, archived files, and several rows of metal lockers. Mr. Harris walked to the final row. Box 17C. Daniel inserted the key. It turned. Inside was a battered brown case. Not money, not jewelry, not anything Daniel had imagined. Paper. Hundreds of pieces of paper. Letters, receipts, photographs, school reports, birthday cards. Daniel frowned. "What is this?" Mr. Harris lifted the top photograph. A much younger Grace stood outside a hospital. She was holding a baby. Daniel. Beside her stood another woman he didn't recognize. On the back, "Grace and Daniel, April 2011. Daniel dug deeper. An envelope carried his name. For Daniel, age 5. Another. For Daniel, AGE 6. Then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Every one unopened. Daniel's hands began shaking. "Who wrote these?" Mr. Harris looked at him. "Your father." The basement seemed to shrink. Daniel stepped backward. "No." "Daniel." "No." Mrs. Alvarez touched his shoulder. He pulled away. "My father left us." Mr. Harris nodded sadly. "Yes." Daniel breathed again. Then the old man continued. "But not in the way you've always believed. 14 years earlier, Grace had been 28. She worked in a small bakery. Daniel's father, Michael Reed, drove delivery trucks. They weren't married. They planned to be eventually. Then Michael began gambling. At first it was football, then cards, then online betting. Small amounts became larger. Bills disappeared. Rent money vanished. Grace forgave him twice. On the third time, he borrowed money using her name. Daniel was 6 months old. Grace left. Not Michael. She took Daniel and moved across town. Michael promised to change. For a while he did. Then he relapsed. Grace refused to allow him near Daniel, while his life remained unstable. Mr. Harris knew, because Michael came to the trust looking for help. He wasn't an evil man, Mr. Harris said, but he was unreliable, and your mother refused to build your childhood around promises he couldn't keep. Daniel looked at the letters. So she kept these from me. She kept everything. Why? Because Michael asked her to. Daniel stared. What? Mr. Harris picked up one envelope. Your father began writing to you when you were 5. He wanted Grace to give you the letters, but she didn't. No. Anger suddenly cut through Daniel's fear. So she lied. Mr. Harris didn't defend her. She made a choice. She had no right. Maybe. Daniel looked at him sharply. Mr. Harris continued. Michael disappeared for months at a time, then years. He would get sober, make promises, relapse, disappear again. Grace believed giving you those letters would make you wait for someone who might never come. Daniel reached for the age 10 envelope. His fingers stopped before touching it. Where is he now? Mr. Harris's silence returned. Daniel looked up. Where is he? He died 3 years ago. The anger vanished. Something hollow replaced it. Daniel sat on a storage box. 3 years. His father had been dead for 3 years, and Daniel hadn't known. Mrs. Alvarez whispered, I'm sorry. Daniel stared at the floor. Did my mother know? Yes. Of course she did. Mr. Harris pulled another folder from the case. There's more. Daniel almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because he couldn't imagine there being more. Mr. Harris opened it. Bank statements, payment receipts, school invoices. Daniel recognized Brookfield Academy immediately. His school. The fees after scholarship deductions, books, uniform charges, exam fees, trips. Mr. Harris pointed to the payments. Most came from Grace. Then Daniel noticed another name. Michael Reed. What is this? Your father started sending money through the trust after you turned 9. Daniel looked at Mr. Harris. For school? Yes. Why didn't she tell me? Because the money wasn't reliable either. Some years it came, some years it didn't. Daniel flipped through the papers. The most recent payment from Michael ended 3 years earlier, after his death. Then something else began, a separate line. Grace Reed, supplemental payment, month after month, far more than before. Daniel understood slowly. When he died, she lost the help. Daniel stared at the totals. She took the second job. Mr. Harris nodded. And then the third. Daniel looked up. Third. Mr. Harris's expression changed. Brookfield, Harris Building, and here. Daniel stared at him. My mother worked here. She cleaned twice a week, sometimes helped pack food parcels. 3 jobs. Daniel thought about the burned toast, her falling asleep on the sofa, the worn shoes she'd promised to replace, the headaches, the nights she came home after midnight, and Daniel complaining because she hadn't bought him the trainers Nathan had. His chest tightened. Why? Mr. Harris looked almost surprised. To keep you at Brookfield. Daniel shook his head. I could have gone somewhere else. She knew. Then why? Because you loved that school. Daniel looked down. Mr. Harris continued. You came home after your first week, talking about the science lab. You told her you wanted to become an engineer. Daniel remembered. He had been 11. Grace had listened while washing dishes. He had barely noticed. She told me, Mr. Harris said, I can't give him everything, but maybe I can keep one door open long enough for him to walk through it. Daniel covered his face. Mrs. Alvarez quietly turned away. He didn't cry loudly. Nothing dramatic happened. He simply sat in that basement, surrounded by evidence of a life his mother had been living while he was busy being embarrassed by the uniform that paid for his. Then Daniel noticed something inside the case. A small velvet pouch. He opened it. Inside was a man's old silver wristwatch. On the back, scratched into the metal, Mr. Michael Reed, his father. There was another envelope underneath. Unlike the others, this one had no age written on it. Only, "Give him this when he is ready to know I tried." Daniel stared at it. Was this from him? Mr. Harris nodded. Daniel didn't open it. Not yet. His mother's letter mattered more. Why would Mom leave all this here? Mr. Harris rubbed his forehead. Because someone had been asking questions. Daniel looked up. What kind of questions? For the last 2 weeks, Grace believed somebody had been accessing her financial records. Mrs. Alvarez frowned. Who? I don't know. Daniel felt fear return. Mr. Harris went to his desk upstairs and brought back a printed email. Grace had sent it 3 days earlier. Someone called Brookfield asking whether my employment records listed Daniel as a dependent. They claimed to be from the council. The council says they made no such call. Another email. My landlord says a man asked when my lease expires. Another. Someone has been asking about Michael. Daniel's mouth went dry. Why would anybody care about my dad? Mr. Harris shook his head. I don't know. Then Daniel remembered the final notice, the letter this morning. What letter? Daniel explained. Grace hiding it in her handbag. Mr. Harris's face changed instantly. What did it look like? White envelope. Red letters. Did you see the sender? No. Mr. Harris stood. We need to go back to your flat. They arrived at 2:31 a.m. The apartment door was open. Daniel froze. Mrs. Alvarez grabbed his arm. Stay here. But Daniel pulled away. Mum? No answer. The living room had been disturbed. Cushions on the floor. Drawers open. Grace's bedroom overturned. Daniel ran toward his own room. His books had been knocked from the desk. Mattress lifted. Wardrobe open. Then he looked beneath the bed. The uniform was gone. He stared at the empty space. Someone had taken it. Why would anyone steal a cleaning uniform? Mrs. Alvarez appeared behind him. Daniel. He turned. She held something. The final notice. Envelope. It had been torn open. Grace hadn't taken it with her after all. Someone had left it on the kitchen floor. Daniel snatched it. Inside was not a rent notice. It was a letter from Brookfield Academy. Final notice of scholarship review. Daniel read quickly. His scholarship had been under review because of an anonymous complaint claiming his household income had been falsely reported. Daniel's stomach dropped. That isn't true. Mrs. Alvarez read over his shoulder. Your mother didn't lie about her income. How do you know? Because she asked me for copies of every payroll statement last week. Daniel remembered Grace at the kitchen table 3 nights earlier, surrounded by papers. He'd walked past without asking. The letter stated Grace had 7 days to supply additional proof or Daniel's scholarship could be suspended pending investigation. At the bottom, someone had written by hand, You can't hide him forever. Daniel stared. Mrs. Alvarez immediately called the police. Then another sound came from the hallway. A phone vibrating. Not Daniel's. They both turned. The sound came from the coat closet. Daniel opened it. On the floor was his mother's phone. Screen cracked. Mrs. Alvarez inhaled sharply. Daniel picked it up. Mum. The phone required a passcode. Daniel knew it. His birthday. 4/12. Unlocked. 23 missed calls from him, 3 from Mrs. Alvarez, 2 unknown numbers, and 1 voicemail received at 8:56 p.m. Daniel pressed play. At first, only traffic. Then his mother's voice. Quiet. Breathless. Daniel, if you hear this, don't come looking for me. He froze. A car horn sounded in the recording. Grace continued. I need you to listen to me carefully. Go to Mrs. Alvarez. Stay with her. Her voice broke slightly. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything. Then another voice appeared faintly in the background. A man. Daniel couldn't understand the words. Grace whispered, "No, please. He doesn't know anything." Daniel's blood went cold. The man said something louder. This time Daniel caught two words. "Michael's son." Grace's breathing changed. Then she spoke directly into the phone. "Danny, I love you." Daniel stared at the screen. The recording continued for another 6 seconds. There was movement, a scraping sound. Then Grace said something so softly Daniel almost missed it. "Don't trust." The voicemail ended. Daniel played the final seconds again. "Don't trust." Cut off. Mrs. Alvarez stared at him. "Don't trust who?" Daniel replayed it. Again. Again. Nothing. But during the fourth playback, he heard something else. Behind his mother's voice. A sound. 3 soft electronic chimes. Then an announcement. Muffled. Almost buried by traffic. Daniel turned the volume all the way up. A woman's recorded voice said, "Service to Greenford departing platform 4. Daniel looked at Mrs. Alvarez. The train station. She was already reaching for her keys. Central Station was nearly empty at 3 in the morning. Police officers were waiting when Daniel and Mrs. Alvarez arrived. The station manager reviewed security footage. Daniel stood beside him. 8:41 p.m. Grace entered the station. Daniel nearly shouted when he saw her. She wore her grey cardigan. The same one from breakfast. She carried her handbag. She looked nervous, but she was alive. She walked toward platform 4. At 8:47, a man approached her. The camera angle showed only his back. Tall, dark coat, baseball cap. Grace stepped away from him. The man followed. They spoke. Grace shook her head. Then he held something up. A photograph. Grace stopped. The station manager zoomed in. The photograph was too blurry. The man walked toward the side exit. Grace followed. Not dragged. Not forced. She chose to follow him. Daniel stared at the screen. Why? Nobody answered. The next camera caught them outside. At 8:53, Grace pulled out her phone. The voicemail. At 8:57, the man turned toward her. He reached for the phone. Grace stepped back. The screen glitched for 6 seconds. When the picture returned, the pavement was empty. No Grace. No man. Daniel felt physically sick. One officer asked, "Could you recognize him?" No. Mr. Harris, who had joined them, leaned toward the screen. "Go back." The manager rewound. There. The man turned slightly. Only half his face appeared. Mr. Harris gripped the edge of the desk. Daniel noticed. "You know him?" Mr. Harris didn't answer. "Who is he?" "Daniel." "Who is he?" Everyone looked at them. Mr. Harris stared at the frozen image. Then he said quietly, "His name is Paul Reed." Daniel's heartbeat thundered. "Reed?" Mr. Harris nodded. "Michael had a brother." Daniel stared. "My uncle?" "Yes." Daniel looked back at the screen. "Why would my uncle take my mother?" Mr. Harris's face had gone pale. "Because Paul spent years blaming Grace for what happened to Michael." "What happened to him?" "I told you Michael died. You didn't tell me how." Silence. Daniel stepped closer. "How did my father die?" Mr. Harris looked at him. Michael had finally stopped gambling. He had been sober from it for almost 18 months. He was working again, saving money. Daniel's anger rose. "So why didn't he come back?" "He planned to." Daniel froze. Mr. Harris continued. "He asked Grace if he could meet you." "What did she say?" "She said yes." Daniel's eyes widened. "When?" 3 years ago. The basement letters suddenly felt heavier in his memory. "What happened?" "He never made it." Mr. Harris swallowed. "Michael died the night before he was supposed to see you." Daniel couldn't speak. "Paul believed your mother had pushed Michael too hard. He believed she used Daniel as leverage. He became obsessed with the idea that Grace had taken Michael's family from him." Daniel looked at the frozen image again. "But why now?" Mr. Harris closed his eyes. "Because Paul was released 6 weeks ago." "Released from where?" "Prison." Daniel's face drained. Mrs. Alvarez whispered, "For what?" Mr. Harris looked directly at Daniel. Fraud, threats, extortion. Daniel looked toward the police officers. Find my mother. One officer was already speaking urgently into his radio, but Daniel suddenly remembered the brass key, the box, the scholarship investigation, the questions about Michael, and his father's unopened final letter. He pulled it from his jacket. Mr. Harris noticed. Daniel tore it open. Inside were 3 pages. He read only the first paragraph before everything changed again. Daniel, if your mother ever gives you this letter, then she has decided you're old enough to understand what happened between us. There is one thing I need you to know first. Your mother did not keep me from you because she hated me. She kept me away because I asked her to protect you until I became somebody safe enough to call your father. Daniel stopped. His hands shook. He continued, I don't know whether I will ever earn that chance, but if anything happens to me before I do, Paul must never know about the account I opened for you. Daniel's eyes snapped upward. Mr. Harris whispered, Oh God. Daniel read the next line. He believes the money belongs to our family. It doesn't. It belongs to you. And your mother is the only person with authority to release it before your 18th birthday. Daniel stared at the paper. So that was it. Not revenge. Not only hatred. Money. How much? Mr. Harris sat down slowly. I don't know. The 3rd page contained a bank name, an account number, and a handwritten note from Michael. It isn't enough to make you rich, but it is enough to pay for university and give you the beginning. I was too weak to give you myself. Daniel's throat tightened. His father hadn't left him a fortune. He'd left him a chance. Exactly what Grace had spent her whole life trying to protect. The station doors opened behind them. A police officer rushed inside. We found Grace Reed's handbag. Daniel turned. Where? Near an abandoned warehouse beside the old freight yard. Daniel's face went white. Was she there? The officer hesitated. No. Daniel took 1 step toward him. But we found blood on the handle. Everything inside Daniel went silent. Then the officer added, and this. He held up a clear evidence bag. Inside was a piece of navy blue fabric, white piping around the edge. Daniel knew it instantly. His mother's cleaning uniform. The uniform he had hidden that morning. Someone had taken it from their apartment, and now part of it had been found beside the place his mother had disappeared. Daniel stared at the blue fabric. His own actions suddenly felt connected to everything. Why would he take that? The officer frowned. We don't know. Daniel did. Or at least he thought he did. Paul had searched the apartment for something. The key, the letters, maybe the bank information. He had found the uniform instead. And if he believed Grace had hidden something inside it, Daniel's eyes widened. He grabbed Mrs. Alvarez's arm. The pockets. What? My mother always keeps things in the pockets. Seats, coins, bus tickets, pens, notes, everything. Daniel suddenly remembered something from that morning. When he'd stolen the uniform, one pocket had felt heavier than the other. He hadn't checked. He had been in too much of a hurry to hide it. What was in the pocket? Mrs. Alvarez asked. I don't know. Daniel looked at the evidence bag. But the fabric inside was torn from the lower half of the uniform, exactly where the pocket would have been. Daniel turned to the officer. If Paul took something from that pocket, the station manager interrupted. There's another camera. Everyone turned. Freight yard access road. City traffic camera. The footage loaded. 9:22 p.m. A dark car passed. The image was poor, but the passenger window was illuminated for less than a second. Grace, alive. Daniel moved closer. Stop! The manager froze it. Grace was looking directly out the window. Her hand was against the glass, and around her wrist, something yellow. Daniel stared, then understood. His mother's kitchen cleaning gloves, but only one. She had tied it around her wrist. Why? Daniel zoomed in mentally on something else. Grace's fingers. She wasn't simply pressing her hand against the window. 3 fingers were raised, then 1, then 7, 3, 4, 5. Daniel whispered it. 317. Mrs. Alvarez looked at him. What does that mean? Daniel suddenly remembered a game Grace used to play when he was small. Whenever they got separated in supermarkets, she taught him 3 numbers: aisle, shelf, side. It's a location. He looked at the freight yard map on the wall. Rows of old storage units were numbered: 301, 302, 303, up through 317. Daniel pointed. She's telling us where she is. The police moved immediately, but Daniel didn't. He stood staring at the frozen image of his mother's hand against the car window. Even frightened, even being taken somewhere against her will, Grace had been thinking about him, still protecting him, still trusting that he would notice. Daniel looked down at his phone. His unanswered message remained there. Love you. For the first time since that morning, Daniel typed beneath it, Love you too, Mum. The message stayed undelivered. Then he looked toward the officers rushing for the exit. I'm coming. No, Mrs. Alvarez said. Daniel turned. She told me to stay with you. Yes. She also left me the key. Mrs. Alvarez understood what he meant. Grace hadn't treated him like a helpless child. She had trusted him with the truth. But that didn't mean he needed to run into danger. Mrs. Alvarez put both hands on his shoulders. Then trust her enough to do what she actually asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. Stay with me. He looked toward the doors. Every part of him wanted to follow. Then he remembered the voicemail. Go to Mrs. Alvarez. Stay with her. Daniel stopped. It was the hardest thing he'd done all night. He stayed. At 4:18 a.m., police entered storage unit 317. At 4:26, Mrs. Alvarez received a call. Daniel watched her face. What? She said nothing. What happened? Her eyes filled. Daniel grabbed her arm. What happened? Mrs. Alvarez lowered the phone. They found your mother. Daniel's knees almost gave way. Alive? A pause. Then Mrs. Alvarez nodded. Alive. Daniel covered his mouth. For the first time that night, tears came. Not loudly, not beautifully. He simply folded into Mrs. Alvarez's arms like the child he had spent years pretending he wasn't. But the call wasn't finished. Mrs. Alvarez listened again. Her expression changed. What? Daniel looked up. What? She slowly lowered the phone. Paul wasn't there. Daniel wiped his face. So he got away. Mrs. Alvarez nodded. Then she looked at the final line of Michael's letter, still clenched in Daniel's hand. Paul knew there was an account. He knew Grace controlled it. And now he knew Daniel had begun discovering the truth. Mrs. Alvarez whispered, This isn't over. Daniel looked toward the first thin grey light appearing beyond the station windows. His mother was alive. For the first time in hours, that should have been enough. But somewhere in the city, the man who had taken her was still free, and Daniel still didn't know what Grace had hidden inside the pocket of the uniform he had stolen. Daniel saw his mother again at 5:37 that morning. She was lying in a hospital bed beneath a thin white blanket, one side of her forehead covered by a small dressing. For one terrible second, he stopped in the doorway. Grace looked smaller than he remembered. Not weaker. Smaller. As though the woman who had somehow filled every room of his childhood had suddenly become human. Tired. Bruised. Frightened. And alive. Her eyes opened. She saw him. Danny. Daniel crossed the room before anyone could stop him. He wrapped both arms around her. Grace winced. Daniel immediately pulled away. Sorry. She smiled faintly. You've always had terrible timing with hugs. Daniel stared at her. The sentence was so normal that it broke something inside him. He lowered his head against her hand. I thought you were dead. Grace's fingers moved slowly through his hair. I know. I thought. His voice disappeared. Grace didn't ask him to continue. She simply kept her hand there. Daniel had spent years pulling away whenever she touched his hair in public. Now he didn't move. Mrs. Alvarez stood quietly near the doorway. Mr. Harris remained farther back. Neither interrupted them. After a while, Grace looked toward Daniel's face. You didn't go looking for me yourself, did you? Daniel almost laughed through his tears. No. Good. I wanted to. I know. Mrs. Alvarez wouldn't let me. Grace looked toward her friend. Thank you. Mrs. Alvarez folded her arms. Your child is stubborn. Grace looked at Daniel. You think? Daniel finally smiled. It lasted only a second. Then he remembered everything. The uniform, his father's letters, the account, Paul. His smile vanished. Mum. Grace saw it immediately. Daniel nodded. All of it? I don't know what all of it means anymore. Grace closed her eyes. For a moment, she looked exhausted. Then she whispered, Sit down. The doctors had found no serious injuries. Grace had a cut above her eyebrow, bruising around one wrist, and dehydration. She would be kept for observation until afternoon. Paul had not seriously attacked her. He hadn't needed to. He had frightened her with something far more effective. A photograph. Daniel leaving Brookfield Academy 2 days earlier. Paul had taken it from across the street. He told me he'd been watching you, Grace said. Daniel's jaw tightened. He said if I didn't go with him, he'd speak to you instead. So you followed him? Grace nodded. I thought I could keep him away from you. You should have called the police. I tried. The voicemail. Yes. Daniel looked down at his hands. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Grace didn't answer immediately. Which part? My dad. His voice changed. The letters. Grace looked away. The account. Still nothing. Paul. Grace finally looked back. All of it. Daniel stood. You decided everything for me. I was your mother. That doesn't mean you get to erase somebody. Grace flinched. Daniel saw it, but he was too hurt to stop. My father wrote to me. Yes. For years. Yes. And you hid every single letter. Yes. Why? Because he asked me to wait. Daniel stared. That isn't what Mr. Harris said. Grace's expression changed. What did he tell you? That Dad wanted me to have them. He did. So you lied. Grace looked down. Daniel's chest rose and fell. Mrs. Alvarez quietly left the room. Mr. Harris followed. The door closed. Now it was only mother and son. Grace stared at the blanket. When you were 5, your father wrote you a letter, promising he would come for your birthday. Daniel said nothing. He didn't. She continued. When you were 6, he wrote again. Christmas. Grace swallowed. He didn't come. Daniel's anger softened slightly. At 7, he sent you a card and said he'd finally gotten himself together. She looked at him. He disappeared for 11 months. Daniel slowly sat back down. I hated him for that, Grace said. And I hated myself because every time he wrote, I wanted to believe him. She took a breath. But you were happy. Daniel stared at her. You had stopped asking when Daddy was coming. Grace's voice became quieter. You weren't waiting beside windows anymore. Something moved in Daniel's memory. A small boy, a plastic dinosaur, sitting on the windowsill, watching cars. He had forgotten that. I thought if I gave you those letters, I would teach you to wait again. Daniel's eyes lowered. That doesn't mean it was right. No, Grace answered so quickly that he looked at her. I know. There was no defense in her face. No excuse? Grace shook her head. I was trying to protect you. Sometimes parents call something protection because admitting we're afraid sounds worse. Daniel didn't know what to say. Grace continued. I should have told you when you got older. Why didn't you? Because by then you hated him. Daniel looked at her. And every year I waited, telling you became harder. Grace gave a sad smile. I kept thinking there would be a perfect moment. There wasn't. No. And then he died. Grace's eyes filled. Yes. Daniel looked toward the window. Did he really plan to see me? Yes. The next day? Yes. What happened? Grace took several seconds before answering. He was driving home from work. Daniel closed his eyes. A heart attack. He opened them. Grace continued. The doctors said it happened very quickly. So there had been no dramatic final moment. No secret murder. No enormous conspiracy. Michael Reed had simply been a flawed man, trying, too late perhaps, to become someone better. And his heart had stopped before he could prove whether he would succeed. Daniel stared at his father's old watch around his own wrist. He had put it on at the police station without realizing why. Did you love him? Grace looked at the watch. Once. And later? I wanted him to get better. That isn't what I asked. Grace smiled faintly. No. A long silence followed. Then Daniel asked the question he had been avoiding. What did Paul want? Grace's expression hardened. The account. Dad's account. Yes. How much is in it? About $27,000. Daniel blinked. Not millions. Not a fortune. Enough for university. Enough for a beginning. Exactly as Michael had written. Grace continued. Your father built it slowly. Whenever he was doing well, he put something into it. Paul thought it belonged to him. Paul believes Michael owed him money. Did he? I don't know. Maybe once. Grace looked toward the door. Paul has spent most of his life convinced other people's mistakes are debts they owe him. What was in your uniform? Grace looked back at Daniel. He stopped breathing. About that? They found part of it. Grace's expression changed. Where? Near the warehouse. She closed her eyes. Then Daniel asked, what was in the pocket? Grace was silent. Finally, a bank appointment slip. That was it? And a photocopy of the account statement. Daniel frowned. Why were you carrying that around? The scholarship review. Daniel remembered the letter. They thought you hid income. Grace nodded. The school saw deposits linked to your father's account, and someone anonymously reported that I'd been hiding money from the scholarship office. Paul. I believe so. But the money belongs to me. Exactly. Grace had been preparing to meet Brookfield's bursar. She needed to prove that the account was not household income. She had put the papers inside her uniform pocket because she intended to go directly from cleaning to the meeting the next morning. Then the uniform disappeared. Daniel stopped moving. Grace noticed. What? He looked at the floor. Mum? What? Daniel could barely say it. You didn't lose the uniform. Grace stared. Daniel's throat tightened. I took it. Silence. I hid it underneath my bed. Grace said nothing. I thought if you couldn't find it, you wouldn't wear it to school. Still nothing. Daniel's eyes burned. Nathan saw you cleaning 2 days ago. Oliver saw you. Everyone was going to know. Grace looked at him carefully. And you didn't want them to. Daniel shook his head. No. The word came out almost inaudibly. Grace looked toward the hospital ceiling. Daniel wished she would shout. It would have been easier. He wished she would tell him how horrible he'd been. Instead, Grace asked, were they cruel to you? Daniel swallowed. No. Did they laugh? No. Did somebody insult me? No. Grace looked at him again. Then who were you afraid of? Daniel couldn't answer. Because he finally knew. Himself. He had been afraid of what other people might think because he already believed it mattered. The blazer, the school, Nathan's father's car, Oliver's holidays, the expensive shoes, all the things that made Daniel feel, for a few hours at a time, nobody could see how little money existed behind the front door of apartment 4C. And his mother's uniform had ruined that illusion. Daniel wiped his eyes. I was ashamed. Grace nodded once. I know. Daniel looked up. You knew. I knew something had changed. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was hoping you would. The answer hurt worse than anger. Daniel leaned forward. I am so sorry. Grace looked at him. I hid the thing that paid for everything. Daniel, your shoes are falling apart. Daniel, you work 3 jobs. 2.5. He almost laughed. She continued. The community trust barely counts. You ate burned toast so I could have the good one. Grace frowned. That is not exactly heroic. You keep saying you've eaten when you haven't. Her face softened. You noticed. I noticed everything. His voice broke. I just acted like I didn't. Grace reached for him. Daniel took her hand before she could. I wanted people to think we were like them. Who? People who don't have to think about money all the time. Grace squeezed his fingers. There's nothing wrong with wanting an easier life. I made you feel small because ours wasn't. No, I did. Listen to me. Daniel looked up. Grace's voice remained gentle, but something firm entered it. You are 15. You are allowed to be foolish sometimes. Daniel lowered his eyes. You are allowed to care too much about what other people think. Her grip tightened. But you are not allowed to decide that honest work makes somebody less than you. Daniel looked at her. Not me. Not Mrs. Alvarez. Not the man who empties the bins. Not the woman who cleans a toilet after everyone goes home. Grace paused. Do you understand? Daniel nodded. Say it. I understand. And don't apologize because I nearly got hurt. Daniel frowned. Apologize because you understand why it was wrong. Daniel thought about that. Then he said, I'm sorry I treated the life you gave me like something I needed to hide. Grace's face changed. That was the apology she had been waiting for. She opened her arms. This time Daniel was careful when he hugged her. And this time, he didn't let go first. Paul Reed was arrested 36 hours later. Not during a dramatic chase. Not surrounded by cameras. He used a cash machine 40 miles away. Police traced the card. He was found sitting alone in a cheap motel room with Grace's photocopied bank statement, the torn uniform, and less than $300 in his wallet. He had never possessed the information required to access Michael's account. He had destroyed years of his own life chasing money he could never legally touch. Grace did not go to the courthouse when he was charged. Daniel asked why. I've already given Paul enough space in my life. That was all she said. The scholarship investigation ended 2 weeks later. Brookfield confirmed Grace had reported her income correctly. Michael's account belonged to Daniel and had never been available for household spending. The anonymous complaint was withdrawn from his file. Daniel kept his scholarship, but something about Brookfield changed for him, not the school. Him. He began noticing people. Mr. Wilkins, who opened the gates at 6:15 every morning. Mrs. Alvarez, cleaning fingerprints from glass doors. The cafeteria worker, who remembered which students couldn't eat peanuts. The groundskeeper repairing broken benches after everyone else had gone home. People Daniel had walked past 1,000 times. People whose names he had never bothered to learn. Grace returned to work 3 weeks later. She wanted to return sooner. Mrs. Alvarez refused. You come back before the doctor clears you, and I'll lock the cleaning cupboard. Grace accused her of abusing authority. Mrs. Alvarez said it was the first enjoyable perk of the job. On Grace's first afternoon back, Daniel knew she would be there. He considered avoiding the East Corridor. The thought came automatically. Old habits don't disappear just because somebody learns a lesson. Then Daniel stopped. He turned around. Nathan and Oliver were standing beside the science block. Football after school? Nathan asked. Maybe. Oliver looked down the corridor. Isn't that your mum? Daniel's stomach tightened. The old feeling arrived. That hot embarrassment. That instinct to pretend. Grace was pushing her cleaning cart toward them. She wore a replacement Navy uniform. Same white piping. Same name badge. Same job. Nothing about her had changed. Daniel had. Grace noticed him. For one moment, she seemed unsure whether to wave. That hurt him. Before she could make the decision, Daniel walked toward her. Mum? Grace stopped. Nathan and Oliver followed several steps behind. Daniel reached for the cart. What are you doing? Helping. You have class. Lunch. I have worked out how lunchtime operates. Daniel took the mop handle from the side of the cart. Grace looked at him suspiciously. You hate mopping. I've evolved. 3 weeks ago you couldn't locate the laundry basket. People change. Oliver reached them. Mrs. Reed. Grace smiled. Hello, Oliver. Thanks again for getting my phone out of that radiator. You're welcome. Nathan looked at Daniel, then at Grace. You never told us your mum basically runs this place. Grace laughed. Daniel didn't. He looked at them. My mum cleans here. Nathan shrugged. We know. Those 2 words stopped Daniel. We know. Nothing happened. Nobody laughed. Nobody recoiled. The world did not collapse. Nathan glanced toward the football field. You coming? In a minute. Okay. The boys walked away. Daniel stood beside his mother. All that shame, all that hiding, all that fear, and most of it had existed only inside him. Grace looked at him. You don't have to prove anything. I know. Then why are you still holding my mop? Daniel looked down at it. Good question. Grace laughed. And Daniel smiled. Months passed. Daniel began spending Saturday mornings at the Harris Community Trust. At first, Grace thought he was doing it out of guilt. She told him to stop. He didn't. Eventually she understood. Daniel liked repairing donated computers. Mr. Harris began setting broken laptops aside for him. Daniel showed younger children how to use the machines. One Saturday, a boy asked him why he volunteered there. Daniel looked through the open office door. Grace was helping Mrs. Alvarez stack food boxes. He answered simply, "My mother brought me here." It wasn't technically true, but in every way that mattered, it was. Daniel never spent the money from his father's account. Not immediately. Michael had written that it was meant to give him a beginning. Daniel decided a beginning could wait until university. But he opened every letter. Some were difficult. Some made him angry. Some contained promises Michael never kept. Others were surprisingly ordinary. One described seeing a boy on a bus who reminded Michael of Daniel. Another contained a terrible drawing of a dinosaur. Daniel laughed at that one. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just hope one day you know that failing to become your father wasn't the same as not wanting to be one." Daniel kept that letter. He didn't forgive Michael all at once. There was too much he would never understand. But slowly, Michael stopped being the monster Daniel had invented and became something harder, a human being. Flawed, weak, sometimes selfish, sometimes trying. Gone before Daniel could decide what he meant to him. Grace stopped trying to decide for him. That was part of her change too. Nearly 1 year after the night Grace disappeared, Brookfield held its annual Student Achievement Ceremony. Daniel won an award for science. Grace promised she would attend. Then, naturally, somebody spilled an entire bucket of paint in the art corridor 40 minutes before the ceremony. Grace texted, "Running late. Disaster involving blue paint. Save me a seat." Daniel smiled. The ceremony began. Parents filled the hall. When Daniel's name was announced, he walked onto the stage. Applause, certificate, handshake, photograph. Then he saw the rear doors open. Grace slipped inside. She had arrived straight from work. Navy cleaning uniform, white piping, hair pulled back. No time to change. She stopped near the door. For a fraction of a second, Daniel saw uncertainty in her face. Almost a question. Should she stay at the back? Would he mind? The same uniform, the same school, the same boy, but not the same story. Daniel looked at the head teacher. "Can I say something?" The microphone was handed to him. Grace's eyes widened. Daniel hadn't planned a speech. That was probably why it was short. "My mother is at the back." Heads turned. Grace froze. Daniel continued. "She works here." Another pause. "A year ago, I would have hoped nobody noticed." Grace's hand covered her mouth. Daniel looked directly at her. "Now I just don't want her standing at the back." He stepped away from the microphone. No grand applause was needed. No dramatic music. Daniel simply walked down from the stage, across the hall, past his classmates, past their parents, until he reached his mother. Grace whispered, "Daniel." He held out his hand. For a moment she only stared at it. Then she placed hers inside. Daniel walked with her toward the empty chair he had saved beside Mrs. Alvarez. The same hand he once pulled away from. The same uniform he once hid under his bed. And this time, Daniel didn't let go. Later that evening, they returned home. Grace changed clothes. Daniel reheated the leftover stew. Badly. The middle was cold. Grace complained. Daniel told her she was impossible to please. She took the burned piece of garlic bread from the tray automatically and put the good one on his plate. Daniel looked at it, then switched them. Grace frowned. "What are you doing? You always take the burned one." "So I'm having it. You don't like burned toast." "Neither do you." Grace stared at him. Daniel took a bite. It was awful. Grace began laughing. Daniel laughed too. On the kitchen wall behind them hung Daniel's science certificate. Beside it was a photograph from the ceremony. Daniel in his school blazer. Grace beside him in her cleaning uniform. Neither of them had asked her to change before taking it. And underneath the photograph, Daniel had written 4 words. Not for guests, not for school, not even for his mother, for himself. Never hide what matters. Grace never asked him to remove it. And Daniel never did. Because some of the most important people in our lives don't arrive wearing the things the world tells us to admire. Sometimes they come home exhausted. Sometimes their shoes are worn. Sometimes their hands smell faintly of cleaning solution. Sometimes they eat the burned toast. And sometimes, by the time we finally understand what they have been carrying for us, all we can do is reach for the hand we once pulled away from and hope we are not too late. Daniel wasn't, and that made all the difference. Written destiny. Some stories look broken only because destiny hasn't written the final page. If this story made you think of someone whose sacrifices you may not have fully seen, tell us about them in the comments. And if you want more stories about ordinary people whose lives carry extraordinary meaning, subscribe to Destiny. You.